This podcast is sponsored by Underdog. Want to make money making picks on MLB games? And you have to try Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to play fantasy sports. In Underdog's Pick'em game, you just pick your favorite baseball players and predict whether they will go higher or lower on stats like strikeouts, hits, and more. Pick to 2 to 5 players, get all your picks right, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Be sure to sign up with the promo code PITCHERLIST, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100, so you have some bonus cash to start playing with. Again, that's UnderdogFantasy.com or Underdog Fantasy in the App Store. Sign up with promo code PITCHERLIST and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Must be 18 or older, 19 or older in Alabama and Nebraska, 21 or older in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. In New York, call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY. In Tennessee, call 1-800-889-9789.
How's it going, and welcome to episode 124 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter at On the Wire Pod. You could follow me at 80grade. That's all spelled out. You can follow Kevin Hastings at HastingKevin on the Twitter machine. And Kevin's not here, but I am back. It's nice to be back behind the mic. This week, very special episode for me, as I'm bringing in a very close personal friend of mine who's been playing fantasy baseball with me for the past 23 years. His name's Pat Brown. He has been in my home league since, like I said, 23 years ago. And we'll talk a lot about that later, because I know how everybody listening always wants to hear about the podcasters' home leagues and all the intricacies. And it's very useful for everybody. But you know what? It's my podcast. We're going to talk about that. So, Pat, thanks for coming on, man. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, my pleasure. I don't know what the opposite of a ringer is, but I think that's what you have on the podcast today. But I'm happy to be here. I'll try to entertain your many loyal fans.
I remember, obviously, when we started playing back in college in 2000, and then we started playing like free public leagues on Yahoo and what have you after playing for a couple years, and how important it was to like completely crush one of those leagues, and or you'd feel really, really bad about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty easy to do, though, because the intensity of the league that we had was, even in those days, was so much higher than what your average, even dynasty league is. I don't even think I knew what a dynasty league was then. Like, we just called it a keeper league because we didn't realize there was a difference between keeper and dynasty.
Yeah, we didn't add the minor league component until 2 or 3 years in.
Yeah, 2004, I think.
What I think what's slightly embarrassing now, as we talk about on the show and in general, we talk about 15 teamers, 20 teamers. We talk about deep leagues a lot. Sure. Our league started as a 6-team league. Yes, six teams. And the standard, I think 22 or 23 man roster. So it has definitely grown a little bit deeper than that, double the leagues. It is a standard 12 teamer. Of course, with the dynasty aspect, you keep 21 out of 26 players from year to year. It's been a lot of fun, and we've had a pretty solid crew throughout the majority of that time. Obviously, for sure, yeah. You go through some owners here or there. Yeah,
it's some churn along the edges, down the middle sometimes, but yeah, for the most part, we've kept a really good crew, and it's a great way to stay in touch. And I'm sure that's what a lot of listeners really appreciate about being in a fantasy league, is just the way it keeps you in touch with your old friends. And we've been doing it for 20 plus years, and it's always just a great excuse to get back together and give each other a hard time about who's up and who's down. It's been a tough few years for me, so I'm looking forward to getting back in the mix this year.
Sometimes it's not even standings. It's just single moves you make, and you're like that haunt you all year round. And then we have to bring those up at our winter meeting in January.
I have moves that have haunted me from nearly 20 years ago. There's really... Yeah, I could tell you some of the moves that I've made that I still regret to this day, but nobody wants to hear that.
No. All right,
at least it's not me.
Let's get into the actual news from actual baseball that might affect how you are looking at your FAAB pickups for this week if you are playing in said types of leagues. And you know what? I always think that these types of things are great to know, even if you're not playing in a FAAB league, if you're playing in a fastest finger league, if you're playing in a weekly, daily moves, doesn't matter. A lot of these things are just going to impact how you're looking to set your lineups for the week, how, what kind of players you're looking to fill your roster spots. So keep that in mind as well. This doesn't have to specifically look at your Sunday FAAB. It can, whenever time you're looking at picking up players. Let's start with the Yankees, as we probably should do. The Yankees are going to be without their starting catcher, Jose Trevino. He goes on the IL with a right wrist tear and is expected to have season-ending surgery to repair it. This move brings up Ben Rochefort from AAA to act as the new backup, presumably, for full-time starter Kyle Higashioka. But what I'm looking at, the more interesting move here is actually coming from the fact that their catching prospect, Austin Wells, was able to move from AA to AAA. Presumably, this allows Wells to prove himself at the highest minor league level before competing for a starting job over Trevino. Trevino says he'll be ready for spring training in 2024, but I would assume that this move puts Wells in the driver's seat to compete for that job out of spring training in 2024. That's a whole lot to say. I'm not really seeing much of an impact on the Yankees catcher situation for the rest of this season beyond possibly an early call-up for Wells where they manipulate the time, where maybe they call him up early with enough time to keep his rookie eligibility. I don't know. But do you see anything different than I do?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's an who knows where the Yankees are going to be in a month. They're really struggling without Judge. And if they fall too far behind, they might even be sellers at the deadline. And if that's the case, maybe they want to get a look at Wells and see what he can do. He's one of those really well-regarded catching prospects that we've got so many of, it seems, all of a sudden in the minors. And might as well take a spin, see if they've got Gary Sanchez part 2.
I will say,
I mean that in a good way.
Yeah. The good Gary. Hey, he had a moment in San Diego earlier this season. He had a moment.
He's still hitting some dingers.
He's just not playing.
We might talk about him later.
Yeah.
Probably will.
The last time I feel like the Yankees were sellers was when they traded Chapman for Gleyber Torres. The Cubs won the World Series and all that. And obviously they signed Chapman back. But it would be interesting, especially as an AL East, we're Red Sox fans and we've seen this for a long time. It would be interesting to see the Yankees actually sell anything, because that really never happens.
I mean, it worked out pretty well for him last time, right?
It's been a few years.
Really for everybody. I'm sure the Cubs would love to have Torres there now, but they really can't complain about what Chapman gave them. So yeah, it's always interesting when the Yankees sell, because it's not really, they never rebuild. It's always a reload, right? When you've got the assets that they have, it makes it a lot easier to pull the trigger on something like that, especially when you get a great prospect and they just pull out the checkbook and bring him back anyway.
Bring him back in. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, let's move away from New York, go all the way across the country to Oakland, where the A's are going to be without first baseman Ryan Noda. Of course, their Rule 5 pick. He's been pretty much starting at first base most of the season for them, whether in a platoon role or full-time role. He's going to be out for at least 3 weeks after having oral surgery. And curious to see if you see anything coming out of Oakland as far as who's going to be filling in his playing time in that lineup and at first base.
Mostly just a stench that seems to be kind of wafting from the West Coast. No, I think it seems like Seth Brown is getting those reps at first base right now, and that's not great, I think, for fantasy owners or for Oakland A's fans. But I don't know, maybe there's other options there. Again, we're talking about that catcher glut. A lot of those guys don't end up as catchers, and so maybe they have an opportunity for Soderstrom to get some playing time there.
Yeah, I will say Brown's been okay, and in a deeper league that he's going to be a little bit more valuable, just because I agree. I think he's going to get more everyday playing time. He's been sitting pretty much against every lefty. Every once in a while he'll get a rep in there. They have faced a lot of lefties in the last few weeks. He has gotten a couple of those where he ends up batting 9th in the order, but when he's facing a righty, he's batting 4th or 5th. In that Oakland lineup, that obviously is what we always want to have a piece of. But it is nice to know that if you do have him on a 15-teamer, that you can rely on him getting at least more playing time. Hopefully that's a positive thing. All right, we'll go to Texas, who they will be sending somebody else to the IL as well, where all-star Corey Seager hits the IL with a sprain in his right thumb. He came up a little lame the other day, and then, he's going on to the IL. He said that he only expects to be out for 2 weeks, a couple weeks or so, as his MRI did show no structural damage on that thumb. So we're all crossing our fingers that it comes back and Texas can continue to do what they're doing. It seems to me that Ezekiel Duran should get a cleaner runway at everyday playing time. He's already playing all over now. I would assume that he's going to get more runs specifically at the shortstop position in Texas. He obviously he's been a lot of people's favorites, especially with what he had done earlier. Cooled off. Is Duran somebody that even in a more shallower league you might be going after if he's available, especially because he has all those positional eligibilities?
Yeah, I think he's the kind of guy that you want to go after now because he's got the opportunity and he can do a lot of different things. And who knows, maybe he finds an everyday spot. And Seager certainly hasn't been the most reliable guy over the years in terms of health. He is a guy that can play all over the diamond. And so that can be really versatile and helpful for fantasy owners. And Seager's always just like one swing away from going back on the IL too. You might end up with something that you think is a temporary situation that could end up being a season-long stash.
Yeah, I'm assuming that we see a lot more of Duran on an everyday. He's been sitting randomly throughout the last couple of weeks against righties mostly, but he'll play against plenty of righties as well. And so I'm assuming that we will see just more consistent playing time from him. Hasn't been doing that great lately. Maybe he turns it on with, like you said, a more consistent playing time. So keep an eye on that situation. Again, if that's somebody you're already being rostered, you might just have a little bit more confidence to play him regardless of any kind of matchups.
Yeah, and some guys just need those reps. It seems like there's a lot of times you'll have a guy who, when they're getting yo-yoed all over the lineup, it can be really tough to get into that groove. But once you let them loose, they can get a little more comfortable. I wish Joe Adele could have got that opportunity before he went flying back on the IL. You just feel so bad for that guy.
Oh, man. Adele's just one of those guys, too. And you see this all the time. It's where, he can't hit lefties. He gets that label right away. And granted, Adele can't hit lefties. I get that. But you get that label so early where you start questioning, did I ever get a chance to hit lefties? Are you actually going to give me that opportunity? And it is what it is. Milwaukee, they're calling up their prospect Sal Frelick, who is on MLB Pipeline's top 60 prospects right now on their most recent update. He started in right field, batted 6th in his debut on Saturday. Talked about Milwaukee's outfield throughout the course of the season and in the early parts of the season where they're going to have a lot of young guys and you're not really sure what to do in that situation. Frelick comes in with pretty much no pop. I'm not expecting anything in that realm, but still going to be able to bring in at least some speed. But batting 6th in that order obviously is not the most ideal situation for stealing bases and getting the most opportunities there. Is Frelick somebody that you'd be interested in pretty much all formats just because of name recognition, or you have to have a very specific need?
I think the specific need helps, obviously. And certainly if you're in a dynasty format, he's a must add. I think in redraft leagues, it might be worth taking a chance if you've got a guy you don't mind letting go, or if you got a little bit of FAAB, burn a hole in your pocket. He can make sense because sometimes it seems like teams have been much more aggressive with rookies this year, both pitchers and offense. And it seems sometimes you get a guy like Ellie De La Cruz who just blows up. And if Frelick has a big couple of weeks, you might be able to spin him at a trade deadline too. And so that's something worth considering for teams that are in contention.
Yeah, the trade deadline is not something we touch on a lot because obviously we're playing a lot of FAABs. In the NFBC, there are no trades, but it has a really important point because I would hope that there are other people listening who do play in trade leagues where this is something you have to keep in mind. Like I said, he did bat 6th for the Brewers today, went 3 for 3. Scored a run, 2 RBIs. So obviously 6th, you're going to have more opportunities for RBIs as long as he hits. And he has shown that he can hit throughout his course, throughout his time in the minor leagues. This year in AAA, batting, it was one of his lower batting averages of his minor league career at 247. Last year at AAA, he finished the year at 365, 435, 508 slash in 189 at bats. That was just at AAA combined with his 317 average at AA. He did okay for himself. Obviously, there's a reason why he's ranked the way he is.
Yeah, and I think sometimes with these prospects that come in with a reputation for being lighter hitters, sometimes something can click for them when they get to the majors. I think a teammate of Sal's, Christian Yelich, right? He wasn't super well regarded in terms of power when he was coming out, and he's regressed a little bit back to that, but he's still a guy who now, he's hitting the ball well again. So who knows? So I never want to take it for granted that if a guy says he's a little bit light with the power, that he's never going to develop into something, especially if his all around skills are solid. So you take a chance on the name and the pedigree, and I think good things can happen.
Yeah, I do wonder how long Frelick has in the Brewers outfield, and if they get a little bit healthier, maybe they make some moves at the deadline. We'll see where they're at. They're actually doing okay for themselves in the standings. Not sure where they're going to be at the deadline. I'll be curious to see how much of a leash he actually gets throughout the rest of the 2023.
Yeah, and it's interesting that some of these teams that are in contention are being so aggressive with their call-ups. It's similar. Look what is happening at Baltimore right now. They're calling up a new top prospect every week, and then Kowser's sitting a good chunk of the time, which is a strange move, you would think. If you have the depth, why not take advantage of it if you think these guys are going to be on the right track no matter what?
Yeah, of course, there's the other side of that coin is something you touched on earlier, is whether or not they're going to get those regular reps and if they're going to stay.
Yeah, they mess with their
maybe is it better to send them back to AAA so that they can play every day, which that's a whole different argument about time manipulation and what have you. So we're a little early in the season to get into all of that. All right, let's go over back to New York where the Mets, they are losing Starling Marte for at least a minimum stay in the IL as he's experiencing migraines. And I know that not every migraine is created equal. So for him to go on the 10-day IL, I got to assume that this is definitely on the higher end of that spectrum. And I hope he gets through that as quickly as possible. But in the meantime, they are getting Mark Vientos up from AAA. The Mets have been calling, not like Baltimore per se, but they've been calling up a couple of different prospects, especially on the hitting side. And you get excited about them for name recognition and what they've done in the minors, but then you don't see a role for them to move into in the Mets lineup, at least everyday role. And I would have thought that Vientos might have gotten more run because Tommy Pham got injured and everybody was expecting him to go on the IL. He was back in the lineup. Are you expecting any kind of playing time for Vientos or at least enough runway for him to do something worth being interested in?
I hope so. I'd really like to see, and I think maybe Mets fans want to see what they have with this kid too. He's got a lot of power in theory. We haven't really seen it at the major league level. And so I think it's an opportunity to let him work out some of these problems that he has with strikeouts at the big league level. A lot of these players, there's only so much they're going to learn AAA. And I know Vientos wasn't exactly tearing the cover off the ball down there, but sometimes it just needs the opportunity to do it at the big leagues, to be with the big league guys, to learn from some of those players. And if he gets the opportunity, what do the Mets have to lose this year? Might as well let him play. And migraines are scary. If Marte, we don't know how long he's going to be out for. So might as well give an opportunity to somebody who I think people are excited about.
Yeah. As we're recording this on Saturday, he did start that game at DH, batted seventh, went 2 for 4 with a run and an RBI. They did face a lefty on the mound to start that game. So at worst, maybe this is a short side platoon with Vogelbach getting most of the reps at DH against righties. Vientos plays DH against lefties. Maybe he fills in the infield against some righties on other times. Cross your fingers. Hopefully he gets some opportunity.
I hope he gets more. We know what we have in Vogelbach, and I don't think it's that exciting for fantasy fans or Mets fans for that matter.
Yeah. There's not much that they're smiling about as Mets fans at the moment. Sorry, Schwebzy and everybody else listening. All right. I like how I just assumed that Schwebzy was listening, and it's probably not the case. St. Louis Cardinals, they activated Tyler O'Neill after DFAing former MVP vote recipient Ryan Tepera. I really don't have anything to say. I just wanted to mention that Ryan Tepera got an MVP vote at one point when he was with the Cubs. Do you expect O'Neill to be traded at the deadline? That's the biggest rumor, is that St. Louis wants to get him in every game because they weren't getting him in every game before his injury. But now that he's back from his injury and the trade deadline is 2 weeks away, are you assuming that St. Louis, who has already stated that they are going to be sellers, or at least they are taking phone calls, they've already made one trade, trading Jess Cabrera to the Blue Jays after DFAing him? Do you expect O'Neill to go somewhere, and does it actually help or hurt his value if he goes pretty much anywhere else?
That's tough to say. He's a great player, or at least he had a great year, right? And he hasn't really come back from that, but he's the kind of guy that we were always expecting to be great. And so I think sometimes those guys just need a change of scenery, and he can get back to where he was a couple of years ago. And the situation in St. Louis is so bad right now. I think that almost any move could only help his fantasy value.
Yeah, it seems like the Cardinal magic or Devil magic has completely run out in St. Louis.
The Bill came due.
No.
Bill Piper.
But it would be very appropriate if the Cardinals traded an outfielder to somebody else and they became something spectacular. Obviously, Randy Arozarena.
Colorado. I mean, it's not. I don't know why Colorado would do that, but they just owe him one after,
Is he old enough?
Arenado.
He might be old enough to finally start in Colorado. Colorado has a very specific need of only having guys that are much older than their actually talented prospects that are coming up.
Whatever they can do to block the kids.
Yeah, exactly. All right. This is something I didn't think I would say for quite a long time, but the first place Baltimore Orioles, they jumped on the trade wagon early. We talk about the trade deadline coming up in a couple of weeks, but they grabbed Shintaro Fujinami from the Oakland A's. Fujinami, he started off terribly in the rotation for the A's, but really turned things around, especially since moving into the bullpen, a full-time bullpen role, moving up the pecking order in Oakland. He was my favorite take to take over closing duties in Oakland once Trevor May was traded. May is still sitting on the wire in our dynasty league. And just because we're all on the assumption that one, Oakland's not very good, even though May's getting saves here or there in this head-to-head dynasty league, knowing that Trevor May is probably not long for the Oakland A's bullpen after August 2nd, and he won't be closing wherever he goes somewhere else. Hence, he's still on the wire. Do you think there's anyone else in that Oakland bullpen that's worth picking up as any kind of speculation?
I want to say somebody, but I feel like how much value is there in Oakland? It's how many saves are they actually going to get? It's just so hard to make any recommendations there when even if a guy does become the guy, what's he going to get? 5 or 6 saves, maybe the rest of the way. I'm sure it's a difference maker for somebody, but yeah, I don't see anybody taking over in a way that's going to make it worth the juice isn't worth the squeeze there for me.
Yeah, we had the same conversation with Jay Crumpler 2 weeks ago, and we're talking specifically about the Kansas City situation with Carlos Hernandez, who's expected to take over as closer for them. But again, how many saves does he actually get? Especially in a roto league, that matters. It's no different than maybe you get lucky in a head-to-head league and he gets 2 or 3 saves in the week that you need him to do that. But in a roto league, if you're speccing on him for 2 months worth of work, he better be putting himself in an opportunity, or they better be putting him in an opportunity to get those extra saves. And I agree with you. Oakland's not a bullpen that I'm going to be speccing on, at least not this week, maybe right after the trade deadline, if there's a very clear name. But FAAB dollars are not there's not a whole lot of them to go through at this stage of the game in most situations.
Yeah. Take it from a guy who rode that Chicago Cubs closer carousel.
I was in it. I was in that with you.
Ways.
Yeah.
Fulmer, Boxberger, like ultimately I landed on Alzolay and I'm happy about that. It's actually working out pretty well lately, but oh man, I had to kiss a few toads to get my prints there. It was not pretty.
All right. Yeah. Alzolay seems to be holding on to that job with a iron fist at the moment. We'll
think it happened.
Arbitration is a real thing. Let's just keep that in mind. All right. In the most, whatever kind of news you want to call this, Jared Kelenic, he broke his foot doing exactly what you would expect. He kicked a water cooler after striking out, obviously really pissed. I'm hoping the water cooler was full. I haven't seen a word on this. My first picture was in my mind was that the water cooler was empty. It was just like one of those bubbler bottles sitting on the ground, and he just kicked it just in the perfectly wrong. I'm hoping it was full, and that's just how it worked out. It does seem like, though, Pat, that there's always, at least recently, there's been one of these self-induced anger management injuries each year. And I immediately think just 2 years ago, Huascar Ynoa broke his hand after getting pissed off about his poor outing. He punched the clubhouse bench. Is there any injury that kind of pops in mind to you when it comes to like just these kind of like anger management or just freak injuries?
Yeah, baseball has a rich history of freakish injuries, strangely enough. And there's always the classic, the pitcher gives up a bunch of runs, punches a bullpen door, or pitches the wall, something like that, and breaks his hand. The history's littered with those. I think maybe my favorite freakish injury is Sammy Sosa sneezing really hard and like pulling a muscle in his back. That was a classic. And who was it? They were moving a vase and they like smashed it or cut their fingers. I don't know. There's been a lot of weird ones. And then my favorite of all time, though, are the cover-up ones, right? Where you have somebody like Jeff Kent claimed to break his wrist washing his truck. And then you're like, oh, that's a weird injury. I guess he goes really heavy on the suds when he washes his truck, and it's very careful, I guess, when he's around it. But of course, it turned out he was riding his motorcycle, which was prohibited in his contract, and that's what got him. Aaron Boone playing ball. I'll always be happy about that one after what he did to us in 03.
I think Adam Eaton slipped on the dugout steps a couple years ago in Washington. I think that was Adam Eaton. I was going by, we were talking about this before the show started, and I had to Google it. I'm going to give Ben Palmer a shout out of Pitcher List. A couple years ago, he wrote an article of the 20 of the weirdest injuries in MLB history. So Google that. There's a couple of really good ones on there. But the one that kind of fits this bill here is Brian Roberts got mad at himself. He hit himself in the head. He got a concussion, which Ben points out was sad because he never really came back from that instance. He's had concussion problems ever since the rest of his career. But he struck out.
Those traumatic brain injuries.
Yeah, but he struck out. He got angry. He smacked himself in the helmet with his bat. He's just hit himself in the head.
You hate to see it.
Gotta control your emotions.
I feel bad for Kelenic, though, because he was finally starting to round into form earlier this season. He's struggled a little bit lately as the league has figured him out a little bit again. You got to make the adjustments to the adjustments. That's what it's all about, becoming a big leaguer. But did you see the interview with him afterwards on the dugout?
I didn't watch the whole thing. I don't think I could really get through it.
This is just a guy who's struggling to contain his emotions, whether it's anger, sadness. I really feel for him. I hope he is able to get the help he needs to keep his career on track, because he's an exciting player when it's all going well. So hopefully he can get this under control and maybe take this an opportunity to work on some meditation. That's something that can really calm you down and maybe help him with his focus on the field too. Who knows?
Yeah, it really comes down to, we've seen so many guys this season in baseball go on the IL for mental health reasons. And it's really the first time we've seen this out in public. I'm sure there's been a couple in the past that have just been hidden and they just put it in for some other reason. And the guy just needs to get their head right, but they don't put it out there. Austin Meadows comes to mind. Trevor May was on the IL with the same reason. And so more power to these guys for actually coming out and saying what the issue is and having to get through it and coming back. Obviously, May came back, Daniel Bard came back and did well for themselves. Nick obviously has a lot on his mind, whether he takes what he does on the field very personally. It just seems as though, to get back to the question at hand, really, is this Seattle outfield had all the potential in the world 2.5 years ago. Like almost had a gluttony of talent. And obviously, Kelenic, like you said, really come into his own earlier in the season, has to adjust to the adjustments and all that. But between him and Julio Rodriguez, and at the time, Kyle Lewis, even Rookie of the Year, right now they are short in the outfield. Specifically, they have also lost AJ Pollock. He goes on the IL with a hamstring strain. They bring up Taylor Trammell, who was also in that conversation. Obviously has not worked out for him on the field at the majors thus far. Is this the opportunity Trammell needed to like really get going? He did not start the day that they called him up. Do you see him actually being able to put it together and be a name we actually care about in fantasy?
Probably not, no.
No, okay. We'll move on there.
But who knows? Who knows? I think Kelenic really is the guy that they need to, and they're going to give him every opportunity to come back and pull himself together.
I question whether or not he's going to come back this year, depending on how quickly that foot heals. Obviously, we'll see. And where Seattle is in the playoff picture come September is one of those things where I wonder if you just let him heal throughout the September and don't force him back early.
Yeah, maybe. But you probably want to get a little momentum, especially he really feels like he let those guys down. They probably want to get his head right and have some positive moments to build on for next year. And I don't know the specifics with the injury, but I know Jazz Chisholm came back from what seemed like a pretty bad toe injury that he's going to need his off-season surgery for. And he came back, hit a home run, pulled his oblique, but looked great before that.
Totally different part of the body, though.
So who knows if he can come back and get something done. We'll see. But I feel for the kid. I hope he's all right.
Agreed. All right, that's gonna lock up our news section of the pod. Of course, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happened over the course of the week. To catch up on everything you need to know on a daily basis, you should be listening to the First Pitch podcast with Casey Bubba and Jake Crumpler on the weekends. They break down all the news, highlights, and observations from every day's worth of games, as well as looking ahead at each slate to keep you up to date with everything you need to know to win your fantasy league throughout the course of the season. In just a moment, we're going to come back from our quick break and just talk like I teased it at the beginning. We're going to talk about our dynasty league that's been going around for 23 years now and how that actually helps play in other types of leagues as well. We'll talk about that in a little bit more right after this. All right, we are back. Of course, you are still listening to On the Wire. I am Adam Howe. I am joined by Pat Brown this week of the AC, and that is our home dynasty league that's been going on since 2001. It is a 12-team head-to-head style. You got the playoffs. You got your minor league system. A lot of aspects of it are pretty standard, if you will, as far as your dynasty aspect of a league goes. It's the fact that this league has been going on for 23 years. We've have so many of just little nuances of the league that keep it interesting. We talked about it earlier on. We have seen some rotation of ownership, but the good core, I would say like a good core of 8 teams have been in the league for over a decade now as part of this ongoing league. You can actually follow the league at ACC Trade. It's I should probably spell that out because of course it's EHCC Trade. I'm not going to try to explain it. It's just EHCC Trade. It's fun. Of course, this is one of those nuances that I alluded to that yes, our league has its own Twitter account. All the teams have their own Twitter accounts. We all have 12 followers. And then just the fact that we have
yourself. I weirdly have 50. I don't know how many of those are bots, but
oh, you know how many of those are bots.
What, 48?
How many burners have you created just so you could get up to 50?
Oh, I just have the one, although it is an ACC reporter, so I think it's okay.
And that's the other thing is that we have these extra personas that we've all created that report on our This is a very secluded league.
It's very inside baseball, which is appropriate.
But I think I go back. I started playing a little bit more like more public, more the higher end leagues in the NFBC and like paid leagues and stuff like that, money leagues, if you will. In the last couple of years, I've gotten more into that. And I always say that no matter what, I always end up coming back to this league, to the ACC. And it has a lot to do with, obviously, like you said, this is a league that keeps me connected to a good core group of friends. Most of them I went to college with back in the early aughts, if that's what the kids are calling it.
Kids are calling it that, but
no, they're not. No.
Us elder millennials are.
And it makes it actually playing in all these other leagues I've been playing in actually makes the ACC more important to me. I think you've been playing in it just as long as I have. What would you say that, and now you're coming on this podcast with me, which I appreciate. So nobody has to listen to me do this solo again. What you've tried out other leagues as well. And obviously you just keep going back to that. What keeps you like connected to this type of a league rather than spreading your wings more often into different formats?
I've certainly done other leagues and have done many redraft leagues, public leagues, money leagues, all kinds of points leagues, all kinds of stuff over the years. And for me, at a certain point, it becomes the history of the league, right? We've got 20 plus years of rivalries and trash talk and legacies of players and all that different stuff that makes the league so fun. I've never won a dime from the ACC, but I've put probably thousands of dollars worth of research and energy.
Sweat equity. Yeah.
All of that just to try to claw my way to the top. And I'm honestly the biggest claim to fame. We were joking about it before the podcast, but my biggest claim to fame for being on this podcast is beating you in the championship.
That was a while ago. Yeah, all right.
It was a while ago. It's true. I've been down on my luck for a few years now. I sold out to get that last championship, much like Bill Belichick. And much like Bill Belichick, I'm reaping what I sowed.
Yeah, you got to live with that. Yeah, it's just one of those things where I think we've gotten to a point too where a good chunk of us all have kids and we're thinking about legacy. It's like, all right, how long can we keep this going where we can actually pass it down to to your
the next
kid,
generation?
and just keep this going as long as possible, because you hear people talking about their home leagues on different podcasts and different things and whatnot, and I think that it's really important to have that connection with not only that group of people, but just like the consistency of that one league. And it's nice to be able to play in a bunch of leagues where I have the opportunity to draft players that I could never roster in the AC. As a dynasty league, trades happen. You get connected to these players and you don't want to get rid of them. Some teams are a little bit stronger on that than others, but there's a chance your favorite player you'll never be able to roster in this league. So it is nice to be able to play in a bunch of other leagues where you're able to do that, but I'll never have the connection with a group of 11 or 14 other managers in a fantasy league that I play that I have with this group. And
to say nothing of the connection with the players, right? You're the guy who drafted David Wright when he was still in the minor leagues and became so enamored with the guy, and rightfully he was a stud for many years, that you actually took his bobblehead and painted it to the colors of your team and displayed it in our apartment for many years. And it was a great conversation piece.
Yeah. I have very few bobbleheads, and that is one of them. Yes, I bought a file and I filed off the Mets logo off his chest, and I painted my team logo right on there.
It was incredible. And that's the kind of dedication you have. Nowadays, you probably don't have that kind of free time, but still, you buy the Vlad Guerrero t-shirt and you'll wear that proudly, and I know I will never be able to trade for him because of that.
That is the rule. That is the rule I've come up with. If I buy your jersey, I will not trade you in the AC. And if it's not a Red Sox player, I won't buy the jersey unless he's on my AC roster. Players out there, Matt Cain, I did trade Matt Cain, but I do have a Matt Cain jersey.
Cain forced your hand, though. I did the same thing with Tim Lincecum, right? I didn't want to give him up, but at a certain point, you're the greatest pitcher I've ever seen, man. But it's over. I get what I can. He wasn't mad. He was cool with it.
No, he's cool with it. Yeah, he understood. I get that. He's a cool guy.
He's a chill guy. Yeah, he's a real chill dude.
Yeah, I really just wanted to take this time, obviously, to think about that. Obviously, we have our trade deadline coming up. It's right alongside with the MLB trade deadline, and there's some nuances to our trade deadline this year, but for the most part, that's coming up. So that's a fun time. We saw Kershaw get traded for the first time earlier today. Not happy about that. Not so much that you wanted Kershaw, but I just
wanted him to cost more. I can't believe it. I know he's not the same guy he once was, but he still has value. Jack Leiter? Come on. That guy's... I'm going to put it on your podcast now, so I'm really going to tie myself to it. That guy will never amount to anything in the major leagues. He's like Brandon Pfaadt, except he hasn't had success in the minors.
Oh, ouch. Them fighting words. Pfaadt looked pretty good today, though, right?
Yeah, we'll get to it.
Yeah. Andrew, if you're listening, which you are not.
You need to be, so you can properly evaluate players in the future. I definitely recommend you listen to this podcast and all the fine Pitcher List Network podcasts, because you clearly need the help.
There we go. All right. I appreciate the shout out there. We are gonna move on, though. We do have some FAAB to talk about. FAAB is coming up on Sunday night, as it tends to do in most of your weekly style leagues. We will get into some recommendations right after this quick break. All right, we are back once again, of course, on The Wire. Adam Howe hosting with Pat Brown, who is going to be doing his best to talk about the guys he'd be looking at this week, same as I will. So we're going to go category by category, as we tend to do, starting off with the power category. And I'm going to start us off. I was going to let you start it off, but I just saw that the guy I'm about to talk about was just dropped, like literally as we started recording in the ACC. But I'm going to go ahead and recommend him anyway. Mike Ford is somebody that I'd be looking at in the power categories, looking for home runs, looking for RBIs, playing for Seattle with a whole bunch of injuries. He does seem like he has a little bit of a platoon going on, but he should be facing 3 righties for the first half of the week in Minnesota. Arizona may throw out 2 lefties, though, so this is something you might want to consider. If he's already in your lineup, he is rostered in 96% of the main events, just 34% in the online championships, and just 6%. Maybe that percentage just went down a little bit in Yahoo with that drop. But You might be able to start him for 3 games in the first half of the week. NFBC, you do switch out your lineups on Fridays, at least your hitters, and you might be able to sit him over the weekend as he may face a couple of lefties there. But he's already DHing pretty much every day against righties, probably due to these injuries we talked about earlier. He's moved from the bottom third of to the middle of the Mariners lineup. So anytime you can see that kind of adjustment, you want to take note. He already has 10 bombs with only 115 plate appearances going into Saturday. All 3 of those plate appearances have come against righties, so he's not even getting any opportunities against lefties. He does have a double in one of those 3 plate appearances against lefties, so it seems to be a pretty strict platoon, but definitely has the power. 29.6% hard contact rate. Of course, that is hard hits over plate appearances rather than hard hits over batted ball events. A little bit more conducive for knowing if you're actually putting in good contact, not just hard hit balls. MLB average for context is 26.6, so it is 3 points higher than the average player right now. So Mike Ford, especially a 12-teamer move, he's not available in a whole lot of 15s right now, but if he is available in 1 or 2 main event, those 15-teamers on NFBC, take a look to see if he's available, especially in the first half of the week. You could take advantage in that situation. I'm going to go ahead and let you grab a player or 2 off your list as I collect myself from that. But Mike Ford, again, Seattle, mostly DH, but available in other positions depending on your format.
I'm going to stump for my boy Alex Kirilloff in Minnesota. I don't know main event numbers, he's probably pretty well owned, but if you didn't strike on him this week, this might be your last chance to get him before he really takes off, because he's finally showing us something. He's got 4 home runs in the last week. His ownership rates in Yahoo have jumped 14%. And I don't know, I think he might finally be over those wrist injuries that have plagued him for the last few years and really seem to sap that power. He's been hitting all year. He's been really solid in terms of average and getting on base, but he just hasn't been showing the pop that he really made his name on in the minors. And I don't know, I'm crossing my fingers. I think this might be it. He might finally be showing us the guy that we thought we were getting when he was called up.
Yeah, those wrist injuries are the reason I traded him to you a couple of years ago in the ACC.
And it only got worse after that.
Yeah, yes, he's only got hot. When he's hot, and he's doing good things. He is, like you mentioned, 96% rostered in the main event. I think 70 some odd percent in the online championships. So he's still available in a couple places. And if you need that hot streak, you want to ride that while those wrists are healthy, by all means, check if he's available. He is batting in the top third of that Minnesota lineup every single day. Regardless, when he does sit against a lefty, but he hits against lefties as well. Minnesota's always dealing with their own set of injuries, especially on the hitting side. So as long as he's healthy, he's going to get the time.
Yeah, and he's not really on one of those strict platoons either. He's out there pretty much every day, and he's been contributing all year. It's just now we're actually seeing the power. So this might be your last chance to jump on board.
Yeah, I like it. All right, we talked about Ryan Noda earlier. If you are I have Ryan Noda in a couple of places, mostly in my corner. Every once in a while, I'll throw him in my first base if I need to be flexible. But if you were relying on him, you might be looking at Trey Cabbage out of Anaheim. Excuse me. I don't want to offend any Los Angelesers out there that no, that's obviously not part of Los Angeles. He also, in a platoon, just got called up recently. 19% roster in the main event still, so plenty available in pretty much everywhere. Deeply play here. He should be facing all right-handed pitchers while in Detroit. Toronto might throw Kikuchi out there. Anaheim is visiting, so he might sit once in the weekend series, but still should face 5 out of 6 right-handers. So even if he is continuing to do the platoon, he should get plenty of run, as LA is... Oh, man, we're really going to hear about it. Anaheim is really dealing with all of their own injury issues at the moment, so you're going to talk about him next. Mike Moustakas has been moving from first to third. Cabbage has been pretty much taking over first base there. This is a guy that you see this every year. There's always that 26-year-old quad A type of guy who did pretty much nothing most of the time, and then all of a sudden his final year, 26 years old in AAA, 23 home runs, 24 stolen bases. Yeah, of course, he should be doing that, especially in the PCL, but he still did it, and that's really what matters. And he's getting the run by the Angels at first base that we should continue to see that. And if you need that power and that pop, It's something, especially if you were a team like me that was relying on Noda, Cabbage might be pretty much a 1-for-1 replacement here.
Yeah, Nelson Cruz made quite a career out of being a guy who was labeled quad A for a long time. And when he finally got the chance to really bring it, he clearly showed he was more than that. So if you've got power, you'll always have a chance in this league. I think he could be a good pickup in that regard.
Yeah.
You touched on a little bit. I think your old friend Moose is back hitting dongs. He's got 3 in the last week, which triples makes it safe. Triples is best.
Triples is best.
Triples is best. So I don't know. He's not going to win you much in batting average. That was never really his thing, though. He's looked healthier than he has in a while. And so with the unsettled situation over there in Anaheim, although don't beat yourself up too much about calling it Los Angeles. If the owner of the team thinks they're from Los Angeles, what can you do? You can't argue with that. But yeah, Moose might have some value too down the stretch. I think if he's really healthy, we know what he can do power-wise. And so he could definitely help some teams down the stretch.
Yeah, if I want to find something to argue with Art Moreno, I will find many things that I could easily argue with him. Maybe just basically the way he runs the Angels and giving Mike Trout an actual opportunity to win. We'll start with that. All right, I like that. You got one more on here, though. Go ahead and touch on not rostered at all in Yahoo. I think probably kind of been going up and down in the NFBC. I'm going to look that up real quick. Alec Thomas, 14% rostered in the online championship. That's the standard 12 teamers out there. And then that's Lane Thomas. I don't care about him right now. He is readily rostered, 93% rostered in the main event. So still readily available in those 12 teamers and 2% in Yahoo. Why are you looking at Alec Thomas?
I think since he's come up, I think he figured something out while he was in the minors. And unfortunately, the D-backs have put him in another one of these strong side platoons, but it seems to be working for him. He really feels that he's turned a corner. He's been hitting the 9 hole, which has limited the RBI opportunities a bit, but I could see him moving up if he keeps flashing the power and speed that he's shown since his return. He's scoring runs. He's showing some power. It might be a little bit of a post-type mini breakout for him.
I like it. Yeah, I think we've talked about Alec Thomas on and off a couple times throughout the course of the season. Of course, when you have a player of that kind of talent level and he moves up and down between the minors and the majors, you're going to bring him up from time to time for sure. All right, let's get some speed guys out of the way here. Pat, why don't you start us off with somebody, and I'll move on to my guy in a second.
So I'll talk a little bit about our friend Tony Kemp. You guys have talked him up a little bit in the past, but with Esteury Ruiz out, he's sitting atop that very potent Oakland lineup that we've talked about, and he's making the most of it. Yeah, he's doing all right for himself. He's been hitting over 300 the last week. He's got a pair of steals, some runs. So I think he could be a valuable guy for teams looking for a spark. So he's also got the positional flexibility, which is nice. You can plug him into those middle infield spots as well as outfield. You have that going for you too, which is nice.
Nice. Yeah. Second base, middle infield, obviously nice to have on top of the outfield. For the A's, 40% rostered in the main event. Somebody, like you mentioned, I talked about a couple weeks ago, right before he went on a nice little hot streak. I actually picked him up in the ACC as well. I got what I needed out of him.
What you needed.
It was like 2 days. He was on the roster for like 2 days. And I'm like, oh, you got me my stolen base on the day I needed you to steal a base? All right, you're done. Sorry. If you're looking for somebody with a little bit more consistency, and especially in a roto league, you could ride that out for sure.
Almanac on that one. You knew exactly he's going to come in, steal a base, then hit the road, kid.
Yep. That's all I need. All right. I'm looking at Travis Janikowski right now, 62% roster in the main event, so still available in 2/3 of leagues, or in a third of leagues there in the 15 teamers, still readily available in 12 teamers at 13% in the online championship, 4% on Yahoo. He is sitting pretty much every day against left-handed pitching again, but he's slated to face 5 of 6 right-handed starters next week, 2 of 3 at Houston and 3 of 3 scheduled. If you're looking if you're abiding by roster resources, probable starter grid, he'll have 3 right-handed starters at San Diego. He just moved to second in the Texas lineup, where he'd been pretty much at the bottom third of their lineup as of recent. So if that sticks, obviously that plays a big role. And if he bats in the top third of that lineup again on Sunday, it will obviously give more attention to him, and you might need to spend a couple extra dollars in FAAB to grab him. But the main reason I'm looking at Janikowski, we have all seen the streaks that he goes on to steal bases. And if you look at what the league has done since July 1st, Janikowski is in the top 10 of stolen base opportunities taken. So basically he's taking every opportunity that he has ahead of them. And he's 6 for 6 since July 1st on the base pass when stealing second base, or that's the thing I'm focusing on the most. And he's taken 40% of those opportunities that he's given. So as long as he continues to get on first base, all the jokes right now are Ellie De La Cruz can't steal first base, so he hasn't been able to steal any more bases. Janikowski's actually found a way to get on first base.
I would have put it past him. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like Ellie might be able to figure it out. We'll have to wait and see.
Not in the last 2 weeks, but Janikowski is somebody. If you're desperate for stolen bases, something I tweeted out earlier this week or last week. There's obviously, everybody knows that there's stolen bases up the wazoo this year. It's gone crazy. And it was expected. Just didn't really know exactly how it was going to happen. What we're seeing is that, yes, there are a lot of stolen bases.
Stealing all
and more people are stealing bases, but the good chunk of them are all coming from the guys you expected to steal bases anyway. So they're going up, and the ones that are going up on the lower end are not going up that much. So we're really in the same boat. Like as fantasy players, you're really in the same boat. If you drafted high speed guys, you're good. You're looking good at the top of your stolen base standings, and you're really if you were hoping for those middling guys to carry you, or those lower guys to come up and carry you more and kind of even the playing field, that's not happening. So if you are in that situation, Jankowski and any of these guys we're talking about, you need to really be streaming these guys a little bit more readily in order to play catch up. It's been a lot harder to do than you maybe would have thought at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I definitely expected the stolen bases to really increase in a lot of different areas. And I think there's been a few buyers here and there, maybe guys who used to steal 0 bases, now will steal 2. But yeah, for the most part, it's been the guys you expect just racking them up in hordes.
Yeah, you got Esteury Ruiz, you got Acuna, you got Wander Franco's been one of the more pleasant surprises as far as guy you didn't really think was going to steal bases throughout his career, and then he just skyrocketed. But this really hasn't been the case in general purposes for those types of players. You got a couple other guys you want to touch on here that you got on the rundown, and let you do that. As I love that you're going to bring up this first guy, because this has just been somebody I've been on and off all season. He's just been somebody I've been streaming off the wire in most of my leagues.
Yeah, so we're talking, of course, about John Birdie. When you're talking about positional flexibility, Birdie's the guy, right? He's eligible almost everywhere on the field. And he's really the perfect bench player in that regard, because you can plug him in anywhere whenever one of your starters has an off day. And you can just put him in an outfield, you put him in the infield, plug him into one of those middle infield spots, and he'll go in anywhere, and he'll probably steal you a base while he's at it. He's even been hitting pretty well the last few weeks. He's been hitting .571, doing his best Luis Arias impersonation. And
whoa.
A few bases. Hey, 571 the last 2 weeks. It's not bad. Can't sneeze at that.
Yeah, the thing holding Birdie back, obviously, is he just Miami doesn't start him. He doesn't get started, but he finds his way into the game, and he'll get to maybe even 3 plate appearances after getting put into the game. And like you said, he'll still steal a base for you, even on the games that he doesn't necessarily start. He still has that speed. His speed has been going down. He's not going to steal 40 again, but when he has the opportunity, he's still taking them, and Miami's allowing him to do. He's a tough one to put into an everyday, a weekly lineup, because you just don't know how much he's actually going to play. In a daily moves thing is even harder, because it's like, if he doesn't start, there's no guarantee he's going to get into the game. But at the same time, you look at his track record, and Miami finds a way to put him into the game. As a pinch runner, as a pinch hitter halfway through when they change the starter, whatever it is, he is racking up more plate appearances than it would seem based on his game started.
Yeah, he's the kind of guy, even if you see the red X next to his name, you can feel comfortable leaving him in there and knowing that he still might get you the stats that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other guy I was going to talk about real quick is just Drew Waters, who I think is a little bit of both. He can give you a little bit of pop and a little bit of speed. Seems like he's a little bit undervalued, surprisingly, this year, because he hasn't been bad. He was obviously hurt for the beginning of the year, and now that he's back, he's getting a lot of playing time. He's getting all the run he can handle. And it's not as if Kansas City is going anywhere, so they've got all the incentive in the world to just ride out any rough batches he has. But he's been hitting a home run here and there, stealing some bases, kind of guy that could still provide some value down the stretch for teams.
Yeah, Drew Waters, somebody that I think Kevin mentioned a couple weeks ago, is just one of these guys where the tendency of Kansas City to not let guys run until they prove that they can get on base and hit. But Waters has had that experience in the past he was a prospect who could do a little bit of both. He wasn't a speedster, but at the same time, he was very athletic, playing center field. He has the ability to run the bases. And the fact that he is hitting a little bit, Kansas City feels like, okay, fine, you can hit, you can get on base. We'll let you do what you need to do on the bases. It's coming to fruition, as Kevin alluded to a couple weeks ago. All right, let's talk about some guys that might have a good opportunity. I got a question about 2 players and get your take on that, Pat. But before we do that, I always talk about the schedule coming up for next week to consider as you are debating on what players to put your bids on. There are only 4 teams that have a full 7-game work week next week. That's Cleveland, Detroit, Washington, and St. Louis. They have 7 games next week. There are 6 teams that have 2 off days. We haven't seen this in a while, where a bunch of teams have a pair of off days, Monday and Thursday off for Boston, the Yankees, Tampa Bay, Oakland, Atlanta, and Miami. They only have the 5 games. Everybody else has the 6 games. Colorado, as I always point out, they are on the road to start the week with 3 at Washington, and then they come home for a weekend series against the Oakland Athletics. Oakland A's, as potent as they are off the road, imagine what they're going to be like in Colorado. So we have that going for them. So 2 guys I really want to talk about real quick on this, and these are guys that are pretty readily rostered in the main event, but so these are more 12-team plays. They're both 69% rostered in the online championship. They're both 13% rostered in Yahoo. So readily available in Yahoo. And I always point out, most Yahoo leagues are 3 outfielders, 1 utility, or maybe 2 utilities. And so obviously, just even being a 12-teamer with less outfield options, outfield rostership in Yahoo is usually a lot less than what we would see in the NFBC. Our league plays 4 outfielders and 1 utility. So it's very similar for rostership in there as well. But I'm going to talk about Will Benson versus Kerry Carpenter. Will Benson obviously blowing up for Cincinnati right now. Kerry Carpenter went through his own little streak with Detroit after he came back from his injury, as I talked about him a couple of weeks ago as he was coming back. I'm going to talk. Benson is facing off against right-handed pitchers, all right-handed pitchers across the board next week at Milwaukee and at the Dodgers. He's been in a pretty strict platoon, though he did face a lefty the other day. So we'll see if that adds more playing time to his docket naturally, but we don't have to worry about that next week. He should face off against 6 righties coming up next week. He is entirely on the road, which stinks. Obviously, you want your Cincinnati players to play in Cincinnati as much as possible, but maybe that brings his cost down a little bit in FAAB this week if he is available for you. Carpenter, on the other hand, is hitting every day regardless, and he's batting cleanup for Detroit. He does play 7 this week, being on the Tigers, with 4 in Detroit and 3 in Miami. Of course, Detroit has that makeup game on Monday. Carpenter, I really want to focus on if you're a PL Pro subscriber, you use these all the time. If you're not, you should, and then you should start using them. It's our PLV calculators and the different apps that we have for both pitchers and hitters over at pitcherlist.com. We measure through PLV the contactability, the swing aggressiveness, decision value, and a bunch of other stuff. But those are the 3 things I'm going to really focus on with these guys. If you look at Carpenter's rolling charts in those areas, his contactability, which is how much he makes contact with pitches that he should make contact with versus pitches that he shouldn't be, has been very consistently MLB average all season long. He's been continuously getting more aggressive, so swinging at pitches more aggressively than his counterparts throughout the course of the season. And his decision value just recently took a spike to MLB average. Benson, on the other hand, has been making great decisions all season long. His swinging aggression is extremely low, and we see this with guys like, I'm not comparing him to Juan Soto, but Juan Soto is very similar in this regard. A great hitter who just is not as aggressive as we would like him to be to get those kind of counting stats and the opportunities ahead of him. His contactability has just recently gotten to MLB average. So he is just making that kind of correction in skills to make the kind of contact on balls on pitches that your average major leaguer is making. If this can continue for Benson, obviously he's on a nice little hot streak right now. He's been picked up quite a bit in many leagues already leading up to this, and plus his playing time increasing. I mean, if he can continue to build off of this and use the skills he's already had to be more aggressive with his swing, he could get really lucky and go on an even hotter streak. At the same time, it could very easily backfire on him as well. So this is why I actually like Carpenter more. I just think the entire package is a lot cleaner. It brings the floor up a little bit more, as well as just being in the heart of that lineup every day. Benson is still stuck at the bottom in the 9-hole for Cincinnati. It is nice that he hits most of his games in Great American Small Park. That is nice. And Cincinnati has been a fun team to root for, especially with all the call-ups that they've been having and being surrounded by that kind of an environment. They actually sold out a game. I'm sure they sold out more than one at this point, but it was really exciting to hear that they actually sold out a game, and I think that it's been a while. And great, even as small as that ballpark is on the field, it's got plenty of seats in the stands. After hearing all that, I'm like, Carpenter was picked up in the ACC last week, I think, or right after the All-Star break. Benson is still sitting out there. Of course, he sits out there as like one of the top 3 most added players on Yahoo. You pull up the app and you kind of see that those are the top 3 names that come up. Are either one of these guys somebody you'll be interested in for the reasons I stated, and or are you just assuming that the Flames are going to burn out?
No, I think you made a lot of great points, and I think you highlighted the different strengths of both players. I think they're both in that zone where you want to you can't roster both of them on the same team, but if you had to pick one, who's it going to be? For me, it would probably be Benson. I just like the versatility, the kind of all-around game. It can be a downside that he doesn't swing as much as he should, but at the same time, when he does swing, he tends to make better contact, and so he keeps that batting average a little higher than you see on Carpenter. Gun to my head, I would say Benson would probably be the guy that I would want to roster, certainly for long term. That would be my perspective. But if you just need some pop and you need the reliability of having that power in the lineup, Carpenter's probably your guy.
Yeah, Carpenter. The other thing is Benson at least will give you a little bit of speed. He's got double-digit steals in most seasons in the minors. He's got 9 stolen bases already at the major league level this season. Didn't have any last year in his little cup of coffee with Cleveland. So he obviously adds a little bit of that. Carpenter doesn't really do that. It's not part of his game. He's also batting cleanup. So it's not something you would really expect out of a cleanup hitter in most scenarios either. So there's that. I would agree. I think Benson probably has a little bit of a higher ceiling, but also a much lower floor. If those decisions start going down and the aggressiveness starts going up, and that's pretty typical. If a guy makes really great decisions, he's probably not being aggressive. Like, he's just deciding to swing at the pitches that he knows he can do something with. And that is something worth noting with Will Benson, is that when he decides to swing, he's only swinging at the balls he can actually do something with. If he's swinging at a pitch that he thinks he's just going to ground into the dirt, or he's going to pop up, or something that he knows is not in his wheelhouse, he'll let it go.
Even if it's a strike, he'll let it go. Exactly. That can be a downside, but ultimately it's a guy you want to take a chance on, I think, because there might not be opportunities to do in the future if you don't know.
All right, so some guys that you want to consider, especially if you're looking for outfield help, especially in those 5-teamers in the NFBC. They're both 69% rostered in the online championship, like I said, 13% on Yahoo. So take a look at both of these guys. And at least for next week, keep in mind, Carpenter does have the 7-game work week, which is nice if you're just looking for added plate appearances. And Benson does have the fact that he's not playing in Cincinnati. He's on the road all week. Doesn't mean he won't come back, but he'll face all righties. He can do more with those situations. All right, we're going to move into our pitching categories. Before we do that, we talked about opportunity. So I think this is a behoove place for me to remind everybody that they can be taking advantage of those opportunities by playing Underdog Fantasy's Pick'em Daily Contest. If you want to make some money and by making some picks on MLB games, then you should be playing Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to play fantasy sports. In Underdog's Pick'em game, you just pick your favorite players, predict whether they go higher or lower on stats like strikeouts, hits, more depending on who they're playing against, what teams they're playing against. You can make whatever decisions you want. We'll talk about a couple of those later on, especially in our pitching categories. You pick 2 to 5 players, you get all your picks right. You can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Be sure to sign up with the promo code PitcherList. That's all one word, all capital letters, PITCHERLIST, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100, so you can have some bonus cash to start playing with on top of whatever you put in. Again, that's UnderdogFantasy.com or Underdog Fantasy in the App Store. Sign up with the promo code PitcherList and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Keep in mind, you must be 18 or older, 19 or over in Alabama and Nebraska, 21 or over in Massachusetts and Arizona, and be present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms do apply. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, you can call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. In New York, call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY. In Tennessee, you can call 1-800-889-9789. Let's get into the guys that can add some wins and Ks to your rotation this week. A lot of these you're going to want to keep in mind if you're playing that pick'em game as well. Some of these recommendations are going to be hitting into a situation where they might be more apt to get more strikeouts than what their pick'em line is going to be, or maybe the opposite. So keep these things in mind. I'm going to start off with the guy I just picked up in the ACC for next week. Got a couple of days early. It's tricky. We talk about pickups in the ACC, and I'll allude to them in past episodes as well. I think what people should know is that we have a rule where you can only make 4 ads a week, which obviously hurts your opportunity to stream pitchers every single day, fill in injuries. There, you have to be strategic about when you use them, and it's head to head. So obviously you can be a little bit more strategic based on what you are doing against your opponent this current week. I'm looking pretty good in pitching, so I was able to get ahead of the game and look toward next week. So I looked at Christopher Sanchez, left-handed pitcher for Philadelphia, reliever, been moving into a starting role, has been doing really good for himself in that role, looking like he has a couple of matchups next week that is going to continue to allow him to do. He does face off against Baltimore, which could go either way, but I like that he's in Pittsburgh at the end of the weekend. He is rostered across the main event, but only 50% rostered in the online championship and 14% on Yahoo. Keeping in mind who he is facing off against, like I said, I like that Pittsburgh matchup a lot. Pittsburgh, since June 1st, is batting .229, .308, .352 against left-handed pitching. And they have the 5th worst overall K rate at 26.2%. Baltimore is actually right behind them on the K rate against lefties at 25.5%. I think they're 11th overall, or the 11th worst one. So not something to shake a stick at there. So I think that within a week where there are so many teams that have 2 off days, finding 2 start pitchers that actually have decent matchups is even harder than it normally is. Christopher Sanchez, if he's still available, especially in your 12 teamers, somebody that you should be targeting. And I think he's going to, especially with his recent success, you're probably going to have to pay up a little bit for him.
Yeah, and I was disappointed you got him. I wanted to pick him up earlier in the week, but I wanted to see what he did in his start, and he was pretty solid, not spectacular. And then I locked myself into a different player, and now I have to see where that goes, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
But I think he's a really solid pickup. He's the kind of guy you might be able to ride. You pick him up for that 2-start week, but you might want to see what you got the following week too.
Yeah, Philadelphia has a pretty good schedule moving forward, at least for the next couple of weeks. So we'll see how he fares against Baltimore. I think that's going to be obviously that'll be the bigger test of the 2 starts he has this coming week. But because of the limitations we have on ads, I'm going to ride him out all week, and we'll see how he does with both starts and see how that kind of moves forward. I'm going to jump into my little bit of a deeper play because I just want to touch on them. I don't think it's somebody, these guys aren't going to be somebody unless I'm really desperate in the situation to go after. Like I said, it is going to be way more difficult to find 2-start pitchers with matchups that you really like. So Ross Stripling actually stands out, especially since he actually did well in his last start. Obviously, right-hander facing off against Detroit in Detroit, And then he should be facing off against the Red Sox later on in the weekend. 60% rostered in the main event, 5% in the online championships, 15% in Yahoo. And that's because he just started somewhat recently. So I think there was a little bit of that's the thing. Again, these daily moves leagues, the rostership can fluctuate from time to time as well. Detroit, of course, is the better matchup of the two. They have the 5th worst K percentage right-handed pitchers, and 2nd worst slugging, 5th worst average. It goes on and on here. So you like, especially in the dailies moves leagues, you can pick them up for the Detroit. And then if you don't want to start them for the Boston, fine. But in those weekly moves where you're kind of locked in, the one against Boston could really go either way. So I would take that risk there, especially in a 15-teamer.
I think that's a great thing about having the guy with the 2 start, right? When he has the weak start to begin the week, because you get him against Detroit, he's probably going to pitch great. You're going to get good stats. And then you see where you are in the end of the week if you actually need to roll the dice against Boston or if you want to put him on the bench.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially if you're one of those formats where you have that luxury. Absolutely. All right, I think this is the guy you talked about you're a little locked into. So why don't you get into why you're going to continue to stay locked in on him?
This isn't the guy I'm locked into.
Oh,
that's a reliever.
But pick him up.
Yeah, I thought about picking up this guy. Listen, anytime somebody strikes out double digits players, you got to suddenly stand up and pay attention, right? I remember years ago, I picked up Mike Fears as just a streamer, and he struck out like 13 batters. And I was like, I guess this guy's a permanent fixture on my roster. Let's see what happens. But in this case, I'm talking about Alec Marsh. He had that amazing start against Tampa Bay that kind of came out of nowhere and really sent his ownership numbers surging, only for everyone who added him to get burned against the Yankees. But the Yankees are still a tough pitching matchup, even without Judge, especially in New York. And I think he has a nice bounce back start on the line for his matchup against Cleveland this week.
Yeah, Cleveland, of course, they find a way to lead that division at any given time, right? But it's never, beyond Jose Ramirez, it's never a lineup that you're actually, obviously what Josh Naylor's been doing recently as well, but it's never an offense where you're like, oh man, I really don't want to face the Cleveland Guardians this week. So it's not something you're going to be scared away from.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see 11 strikeouts again, but you might see something a little closer to what he did against Minnesota a few weeks ago. We struck out 5 guys, had solid ratios, and I think that's what you can expect against Cleveland. If not, there's always a little bit of magic that could be in that arm. We have to wait and see, but I think he's a solid pickup regardless, even if it's a 1-start week.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. I'll give a quick shout out to Jake Irvin, who's doing some fun things in Washington. He does face off against Colorado in Washington's always nice to get Colorado on the road. He doesn't have 2 starts, but in the deepest of leagues, he is readily available. 8% in the main event, 2% on Yahoo. Somebody, especially in a dailies moves league, you might be looking at to stream midweek as his start comes up against the Rockies on the road. Sweet Rocky Road is always something that you want to take note of, especially if you are desperate.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to our ratio hits here. Again, we're looking at ERA and WHIP. Doesn't have to be a starter. Usually we talk about relievers here as they're a little bit safer in this category from given time, especially guys that you can pick up off the wire. I brought him up a couple weeks ago as well. I'm going to bring him up again just because it's just insane what he's been doing. He literally has just moved into his counterpart's role. I'm talking about Joel Payamps of Milwaukee. He's moved into Devin Williams' role that he had with Josh Hader when he was in. He's obviously the clear backup to Williams in the bullpen. If anything were to happen to Williams, he gets traded early. He gets hurt. He's going to be the guy that you want in there. He's had 2 strikeouts in each of his last, I think, 5 outings from both before the All-Star break and continuing after the All-Star break. 36% roster in the main event, 6% in the online championship, 35% roster in Yahoo. So it's obviously a name that keeps popping up on one of those top added players. Again, if you need flexibility and you don't trust anybody else, especially in one of these situations like we're going into where there's so many teams with 2 off days, a guy like Payamps who has the opportunity to pitch 3 games, especially we see what he ends up doing throughout the course of this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. If he pitches on Sunday, I'm less likely to go after him because he has less opportunity to pitch 3 or 4 days in the week. But if he doesn't pitch on Sunday, I like him a lot for this coming week, especially in weekly formats where you're locked into your rotation. You want to get as many innings as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Payamps is a great ad if he's available in your league, and it could end up being a lot more than just helping with ratios.
Especially as you come closer and closer to the trade deadline. I know Devin Williams is not really at the center of people thinking he's going to get traded. They traded Josh Hader as well, even though you saw that coming a little bit at the time. We'll see what they end up doing. All right, you got one guy on here for ratios, and then we'll jump right into saves because these guys all kind of blend together sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. This is a little bit of a shot in the dark here, but Bryce Wilson's been pitching pretty well also in Milwaukee. Maybe the kind of guy who can step into that Payamps role if Devin Williams is traded. He's the sort of guy he's one of these 2-pitch sort of dudes who hasn't been able to get it together as a starter, but I think he can show some. He's had some success here and there, and Pittsburgh thought they could fix him, but eventually gave up and basically traded him for a Kershaw-like return from Milwaukee. And now he's doing pretty well. He's doing pretty well in the pen in Milwaukee, and I think he's the kind of power arm that can maybe vulture a win, maybe get some holds if your league considers those, and just give you some solid ratios across the board. And we'll see where he goes from there. But I've always liked him, and I think he's a solid arm going forward.
Yeah, the good thing that Wilson has for him is that you don't necessarily always have to rely on him pitching 3 or 4 times in the week to get the innings. His last outing, he just went 3 innings. He's got more than a full inning a whole bunch of times in the last couple of weeks, where it's built himself up as well from that. So it's nice to know that if push comes to shove, you could just get all the innings out of him in 2 appearances rather than having to hope, cross your fingers, they use him for 3 or 4. All right. Like I said, alluded to saves category. I will start off here and echo what Jake Crumpler said 2 weeks ago. Tanner Scott in Miami is somebody that should be rostered, as AJ Puck has struggled mightily. I believe they already came out and said that Puck is still going to get saves, but Tanner Scott is obviously the guy that's going to take over the role if and when they make that kind of a change. And if Miami doesn't actually trade for another closer, as Miami's doing pretty well for themselves, and they actually might be buyers at the deadline to kind of shore up those holes that they might have. But Tanner Scott, 51% in the main event, 6% in the online championship. I'm assuming that 51% in the main event is going to be close to 100 after this week. In the online championship, I'm going to go ahead and assume, just because saves are so difficult to get and to kind of lock down, that we're going to see a very big spike even in those 12 teamers after what we've been seeing out of Puck lately and what we've been seeing out of Scott as well, as Jake talked about a couple of weeks ago. So I think that's a name that we're going to see, and we're going to start seeing a lot more situations as we get closer and closer to the trade deadline, where you're going to want to take these. You're also going to want to take more chances on these possible closer replacements in situations where the primary closer could get traded away as well. Something you want to consider doing this week when it's maybe a little bit cheaper in FAAB than wait until the Sunday of the trade deadline.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. The guy I'm looking at, and the guy who's locked me in my team, is Kevin Ginkel. And this is a guy I'd never even heard of until a couple weeks ago. And all of a sudden, he's Torey Lovullo's guy out there in Arizona. I'll be honest, I don't really know what Torey's doing. It seems like hasn't quite figured out what he's going for in terms of the bullpen out there, but it seems like Ginkel's the guy right now. And so I say ride the hot hand if he's available.
Ginkel, I felt, had his opportunity last year and just decided he didn't want it or something, because he just was not producing. Everybody thought he'd come in and take it from Melanson at some point. He just didn't do it. But yeah, Arizona, it seemed as though it was a bullpen everybody wanted to avoid going into the season. And then all of a sudden, that's all anybody wanted. I know I wanted Castro I had him in a bunch of places, and when he was tearing it up, Chafin obviously just came back from paternity leave, but he had his moment, and that's not to say that he can't come back. Chafin is the only guy I believe that's like under contract. Everybody else is arbitration eligible. So something to keep in mind. I bring this up every week because Grant Washburn has really opened my eyes to this situation. And you're going to talk about it with another guy later on, a different team where I think about it all the time. It's just the amount of money that teams could save by spreading out their saves to guys that are arbitration eligible. And unless you got a guy like Craig Kimbrel who's contracted out and he ends up with all the saves in Philadelphia, granted, most of their relievers are contracted out as well, but it's always going to be something that's always going to be in the back of my mind of who's going to get all the saves. Oh, it's the guy that's actually getting a solid paycheck, and their future paychecks aren't going to be determined by how many saves they actually lock in. So something to consider in Arizona. All these guys are going to be are going to be arbitration eligible in short order, and those saves are going to rack up, and they're going to be used in those hearings.
Yeah, and you'd hope the manager would just go with the guy that he trusts the most. And I would like to think that most managers are probably feeling like they want to have a guy they can count on consistently. But Moneyball is what it is, right? And this is a little bit like the running back situation that we've seen and heard so much about in the NFL the past couple of weeks. And it's just a position that's been devalued a little bit because of the market economics.
Sure. The flexibility that teams feel like they can have or should have in that role. So I get that a lot. I talk about it with the Dodgers all the time, though. Usually I get rebutted with the Dodgers have money. They can afford to spend on a guy in arbitration, but we see a new option in LA coming up as well.
Yeah, Ryan Brazier got a save last week, and this is a guy who was a playoff hero for the Red Sox. He was pretty well loved in the town, and he was just so bad that they had to let him go, find his way out to Los Angeles, and lo and behold, they've discovered something out there. They've fixed him. He's been putting up great numbers and even picked up a save the other night. And that they've got a bunch of live arms in that bullpen, and Phillips has obviously been the guy for the most part, but it just seems like the team doesn't want to commit to him for whatever reason. And Gratterall too, for that matter. A guy like Brazier, he's 0% owned in Yahoo right now, but could be a guy who could get you some good ratios and maybe pick up a few saves down the stretch.
Yeah, Dodgers, of course, always going to be in the mix at the trade deadline. We'll see if they actually... There's not a whole lot of solid closers who are going to be on the market, I think. There might be a handful, but I would venture to guess that there's going to be more closers that move at the deadline that find their way into a role that's not a closer role. Like Trevor May obviously comes to mind. Even Barlow out of Kansas City. Like, I don't expect him to go into a new closer role. I would expect him to go into the back end of a rotation or in back end of a bullpen. So maybe somebody like David Bednar actually moves if Pittsburgh actually gets what they feel like they should get for him. And he has a couple of years of control still, and obviously he's very good. So we'll see how many of these guys actually San Diego could actually end up become sellers, and they could actually move Hader before the end of that deal.
AJ Preller's not going to sell. No way.
Yeah. AJ Preller will find a way to make moves. Whether he considers it being selling or not is up to him, but he'll find ways to make a move. Simple as that.
Fair enough. Yeah.
All right. Like I said, my other thing is just keep an eye on where you think those moves are going to make and make those spec ads this week. You could probably do it for a lot cheaper than you can next week as things get a little bit clearer before the trade deadline. I'm going to let you hold court with the wild card section, which is my favorite section to just listen to the type of players. I almost put somebody on here. It was more of somebody I had talked about weeks ago that I'm completely out on now. And it was going to be Trevor Story as he's coming back. He is supposed to be doing his rehab both at shortstop and DH. Obviously, when he comes back with the Red Sox, he'll be DHing pretty much entirely when he does play. I just don't know what to actually expect. I have no faith in what I'll actually see out of him fantasy wise from a production standpoint, that I'm taking back my recommendation from like weeks and weeks ago when I said, go ahead and stash him now while you still can. I don't know if you've heard anything more. You still live outside of Boston. You still are a little bit closer to the local Red Sox talk than I am. Have you heard anything more positive about Trevor Story than I have?
I don't think I've heard anything positive about Trevor Story ever in Boston.
Fair.
I think people around here see him as the guy that drove Bogey out of town and then got hurt. And we've had just absolutely atrocious play from the shortstop position all year. So I think everybody, I guess, will be glad to have him back, but I'm certainly not counting on him doing much of anything.
Yeah, fair. All right. You got more interesting players to talk about then. The players that you might actually want to pick up.
Perhaps. So Brandon Pfaadt has been the bane of my existence this year. As I traded up for my waiver priority to get him, I gave up a pick that ended up turning into Encarnacion Strand. So I'm feeling some pangs of regret about that now.
Yeah.
So first of all, I think I have to understand why the D-backs hate Brandon Pfaadt so much.
It does seem that way.
It just seems like they're going out of their way to give this kid the toughest matchups possible at all times. It's really completely bizarre to me. He debuts against at home, which, as we all know, that is a terrible home park for him to be pitching in. And so just to have a home start in Arizona, he's already got one strike against him. And then they decide that it's going to be a good idea to put him up against Texas, at the Red Sox, Tampa Bay, he gets called up for a start against. It's like they're trying to ruin this kid's career by putting him up against the toughest.
Yeah, that was the one. That was the one. I think the Tampa Bay is the one where they actually came out and said he's here because we don't have another choice. Like we don't have another option. Like we have no confidence. Come out and they didn't come out and say I have no confidence, but you might as well have just said we have no. They
basically said, "Listen, we hate it too, but what are we going to do?" And then they pulled the same thing today, going in Cincinnati, putting against that potent lineup. And I'll tell you what, I had him on my bench. I didn't want to take that chance today. And of course, he looked fantastic for the first 5 innings.
So we appreciate your sacrifice.
Yeah, it really is. It's true. Anytime I bench a guy, it's actually been a pretty good gambling strategy for me this year. If I bench a guy, I bet on him to hit a home run, and I've made some money doing it. So I promise to try to only use these powers for good, but I'll do the best I can. But yeah, so I benched him. He was great for 5 innings, but then it was the same thing that we've seen from him. He gave up 3 home runs in the 6th. That's just been the issue with him in the majors. He's given up the long ball, but at least we've seen the flashes. Certainly today, he retired 16 straight batters at one point. He looked like he had all his pitches working. Who knows? He might be up to stay now. And if he is, I think he might be worth holding on to for teams. I know the fantasy community has had it with this guy. Believe me, I am numero uno on the anti-Brandon bandwagon for most of the year. But I think I let my emotions subside, as I hope Jared Kelenic can learn to do. I held on to him, and I think I might be in line to reap some rewards on it.
All right. I like it. I know I had plenty of exposure to Brandon Pfaadt earlier on in the season. I drafted him in a few redraft leagues in the hope, of course, in the NFBC. If you don't draft a rookie, you cannot pick them up in FAAB until they make their debut. So, of course, there's always going to be some speculation ads, especially in 12-teamers, where you can take a little bit more chances there. So I had plenty of thought. I had a handful of Andrew Painters, which obviously have been dropped. And
those have expired. Yeah.
They have expired until 2025. And so we'll see what happens there. Obviously, if anybody hasn't heard, Andrew Painter has been suggested by the Phillies to get Tommy John. I haven't heard a word that he's actually going to do it or not, but the Phillies, if they have their way, he'll have the surgery soon.
Getting Dr. Neil Elatrache, which is always, that's the last.
And that's the second opinion, or is that the first opinion? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, him and James Andrews. If you hear them, if you see them on the Roto blurb,
you know what's happening next.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's too bad because these guys, I understand Tommy John surgery isn't the automatic bounce back that it's been in the past. So I understand guys wanting to do everything they can to rehab it. But how many times have you seen a guy with a torn UCL say, "Oh no, I'm gonna rehab it," and then actually
and then it works
not
out.
Have to go Tommy John? I think the only guy is, who was it, Tanaka in New York, actually was able to pitch fairly effectively for years. Yeah. But we haven't heard much from him lately, so maybe
nobody is immune. Look at Jacob deGrom said the same thing. I'm fine. I'll be fine. And obviously he got his bag. Good for him. And tried to pitch through at the beginning of the year and did not end well.
Never works. It never works. You just gotta, I understand now, especially if it's your second one, but you just gotta go ahead and bite the bullet and get the surgery, because the sooner you can get rehab and the sooner you can get back. And now Painter's lost a whole year, really 2 years now, because he basically this year was a wash, and now he's going to be out probably all of next year. So it's unfortunate.
All right, we got one last guy on here who's actually going to pitch. I'm hoping he gets another chance. I'm not sure with the Angels schedule and their rotation. We'll see if he gets going, but who you got looking at here for your last guy?
Yeah, the last shot in the dark here is Chase Silleth. He dominated the Yankees last week. He gave up 1 run over 5 2/3. Again, double-digit strikeouts. I don't know that I'm buying it, but if I had an expendable guy, I wouldn't mind throwing a dart at Chase and seeing what they got. He hasn't had a ton of success in the majors, but he's still young. He could figure some things out. 10 strikeouts. That's a hard thing to do. If a guy's striking out double-digit strikeouts, I think you got to at least give him a look.
Yeah, he looked awful earlier on in the season, and actually his minor league stints didn't really look that great either, but they called him back up, and like you said, he looked great. And I know the Yankees can still be the Yankees, but they have looked awful. So I will give him that as well. We picked a good time to face off against the Yankees, the last place Yankees, I will say. I mentioned that Baltimore was first. It's only fair that I mention who's in last in the AL East. So is somebody I wonder how many starts Chase will end up getting throughout the course of the next week or two. But if he gets another one, it's because he earned it.
Yeah, I think he earned himself another one. So it might be worth, if you've got the guy that you can let go and you need to take a chance, he might be a guy worth taking a chance on. Yeah. But I will say no refunds if he doesn't. So.
Yeah. Ross or Resource thinks he's getting a start next Thursday at Detroit. So I'm not upset about that. Yeah. All right. We will end on that note, Pat. Thank you so much, man, for taking the time. I know you've got a birthday party you've got to gotta take care of for the rest of the weekend. So staying up late with me, talking some baseball, talking some fantasy is a pleasure. For those who don't know, Pat and I hosted a radio show in college for 4 years. So this is, if I had the rights to our intro music, I would use that instead, just for old times. I don't think I can get that.
Yeah, we don't have the ASCAP numbers that we used to have at the radio station.
No, not so much.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, man. I love the show. It's great to be on here with you and just awesome talking ball. So thank you.
Yeah. All right, guys, that is going to wrap it up for episode 124 of On the Wire. You can follow myself on the Twitter at 80grade. That's all spelled out. Kevin is at Hastings Kevin. And of course, follow the pod itself at On the Wire Pod. I'd like to once again thank my guest, Pat Brown, for joining me this week. You can follow our league and you figure out which one of the handles is Pat's at EHCC Trade, and see all the little shenanigans we get up to there if that's your thing. After all of that, I am Adam Howe. On behalf of Kevin Hastings, thanks for listening. We bid you goodbye.